And so let's start with the most obvious, that just must be like the elephant in the room. Is the secret to your success to be the CEO of 2 companies at the same time?
No. I think it's...
Because look at the correlation.
Yeah.
Struggling companies, everything's in the craft can in December 2008. So let's take on a new CEO gig. And same for Steve, coming back to Apple. Right?
No, definitely it was not my intention to be CEO of 2 companies. There's certain things that I kind of wanted to, I thought were important to happen, and I thought it was important that that an electric vehicle happened, that there was a success in the electric vehicle arena, because the incumbent companies were convinced that it was not possible to create an electric car that looked good, had a good range performance, and so forth, and that even if you did make such a car, it would not sell, because people had this love of gasoline, so we had to show that it was possible to create a compelling electric car, long range, good looking, all those things. That was a Tesla Roadster, and if you created, if you made such a thing, people would buy it, so that's what we try to do with Tesla. By the way, I should say, like, one minor sort of some correction on the introduction. I'm not a co-founder of SolarCity, but I am a co-founder of Tesla.
That's right.
Okay.
That's a good point.
So,
and product architect of many of its key features.
So,
very much like Jobs, both handed some of the detail as well as the long arc of what's.
So, when I was young, I didn't really know what I was going to do when I got older. People kept asking me, but then eventually I thought that the idea of inventing things would be really cool. And the reason I thought that was because I read a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, which said that a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and that's really true. If you go back, say, 300 years, the things that we take for granted today would be you'd be burned at the stake for. Being able to fly, that's crazy. Being able to see over long distances, being able to communicate, having effectively with the internet a group mind of sorts, and having access to all the world's information instantly from almost anywhere on the earth. This is stuff that really would be magic, or would be considered magic in times past. In fact, I think it actually goes beyond that, because there are many things that we take for granted today that weren't even imagined in times past. They weren't even in the realm of magic. So it actually goes beyond that. So I thought, well, if I can do some of those things, basically if I can advance technology, then that's like magic, and that would be really cool. And I also had sort of a slight existential crisis, because I was trying to figure out, what does it all mean? Like, what's the purpose of things? And I came to the conclusion that if we can advance the knowledge of the world, if we can do things that expand the scope and scale of consciousness, then we're better able to ask the right questions and become more enlightened, and that's really the only way forward. So I studied physics and business, because I figured in order to do a lot of these things, you need to know how the universe works, and you need to know how the economy works. And you also need to be able to bring a lot of people together to work with you to create something, because it's very difficult to do something as an individual if it's a significant technology.
It was suggested that I distill things down to three items. I think I'll go with 4, and I'll try. I think these are pretty important ones. Some of them are going to sound like, well, you've heard it before, but it's worth re-emphasizing. I think the first is you need to work, depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office, and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hard up, we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night, 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, like, I mean, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say, particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, you say like, okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company. The other thing I'd say is that if you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company. Then I'd say focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. So, for example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. I think that's the way to go. So, for any given company, just can keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts. And then the final thing is to sort of don't just follow the trend. So you may have heard me say that it's good to think in terms of the physics approach or first principles, which is, rather than reasoning by analogy, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths you can imagine, and you reason up from there. And this is a good way to figure out if something really makes sense, or if it's just what everybody else is doing. It's hard to think that way. You can't think that way about everything. It takes a lot of effort. But if you're trying to do something new, it's the best way to think. And that framework was developed by physicists to figure out counterintuitive things like quantum mechanics. So it's really a powerful method. Anyway, so that's, and then I think the final thing I would encourage you to do is, now is the time to take risk. You don't have, yeah, you don't have kids. Your obligation. Well, sorry, probably don't have kids. But as you get older, your obligations increase. So and once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. You won't regret it.
How many hours do you work? How looks a normal day in the life of Elon Musk like?
Well, it's really varied quite a bit over time. So these days, it's probably 80, 85 hours a week. For a while, it was over 100 hours a week, and that's just a very high amount of pain. So it's the difficulty and pain of work hours really increases exponentially. It's not linear. But when the financial crisis hit in 2008, 2009, it was just every day, 7 days a week, morning till night, and dream about work.
Okay.
So it was terrible.
And at the time there were bad dreams, I guess.
Bad dreams,
2008.
indeed. Yes. Yeah.
And at what time do you get up normally in the morning?
For me, it's usually about 7.
7, okay.
But I go to bed late, so usually I go to bed around 1 a.m. or so.
1 a.m.
Yeah.
And you start the day with a real breakfast, or just with a coffee, or with a water?
You know, that also varies a lot. I think it's probably true that having a good breakfast is a good idea, but usually I don't have time for that. So sometimes it's made for me, but probably half the time I don't have any breakfast. I had to have like coffee or something like that.
What does people like you and Steve Jobs have in common, or Bill Gates, or people like that? What is it you have in common with them?
Well, I mean, those are pretty different personalities, you know, between Gates and Jobs and Ellison.
Business and success.
I think all three of those were technologists, but with different types of skills. You know, Jobs was obviously very good with aesthetics, and you know, he understood technology, of course, and he really understood what people wanted even when they didn't know themselves. And he was not afraid to break boundaries. But like say, like Gates would probably be better at sort of raw engineering and technology than Jobs, but not as good on aesthetics. But I mean, for all of these guys, they're obviously very driven, and they're very talented, yeah, and they're able to attract great people to build a company. But I mean, the ability to attract and motivate great people is critical to the success of a company, because a company is it's a group of people that are assembled to create a product or service. That's the purpose of a company. People sometimes forget this elementary truth, and so if you're able to get great people to join the company and work together towards a common goal, and you sort of have a relentless sense of perfection about that goal, then you will end up with a great product.
So would you describe yourself as fearless? I mean, are there areas when you seek people for advice, and who would you ask for?
I wouldn't say I'm fearless. In fact, I think I feel fear quite strongly. But if what we're doing is what I'm doing I think is important enough, then I just override the fear. Mm-hmm. So, but it's not as though I feel it like more strongly than I would like.
What was your best idea ever?
My best idea ever?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is tricky. I suppose coming to North America was my best idea, because I think these things would not have been accomplished, almost anywhere else. It's really hard to start a company, but in particularly California, Silicon Valley is very conducive to startup companies.
How do you think about making a decision when everyone tells you this is a crazy idea? Or where do you get the internal strength to do that?
Well, first of all, I'd say I actually think I feel fear quite strongly. So it's not as though I just have the absence of fear. I feel it quite strongly. But there are just times when something is important enough, you believe in it enough, that you do it in spite of the fear. People shouldn't think, well, I feel fear about this, and therefore I shouldn't do it. It's normal to feel fear. Like there'd have to be something mentally wrong if you didn't feel fear.
So you just feel it and let the importance of it drive you to do it anyway?
Yeah, actually something that can be helpful is fatalism, to some degree. If you just accept the probabilities, then that diminishes fear. When starting SpaceX, I thought the odds of success were less than 10%, and I just accepted that actually probably I would just lose everything, but that maybe would make some progress if we could just move the ball forward. Even if we died, maybe some other company could pick up the baton and keep moving it forward, so that would still do some good. Yeah, same with Tesla. I thought the odds of a car company succeeding were extremely low.